you've just had your IVF transfer, either fresh or frozen, and you're starting to spot. What does it mean? Is it okay to spot? And when is it not okay to spot? I'm Nicole Stern. I'm the founder of Fertilista, and we coach women just like you going through IVF. And we get questions about spotting all the time. Stick with me today. We're going to talk about the ins and outs of spotting after your transfer and even after your blood work, even if it's a positive. So let's say you've had your IVF transfer and you've started to spot, and it's a few days post-transfer, and you're thinking, could this be post-implantation bleeding? It could be. Now, I want to say that if you were to poll every woman who's had IVF, half would say they had post-implantation bleeding and half would say no. Let's say you're not having any bleeding. It doesn't mean that your transfer didn't work. Let's say you are having bleeding. It doesn't mean that your transfer didn't work. Let's say you have 1 or 2 children from IVF and you spotted with both of those transfers, but you aren't now. That's okay too. It doesn't mean that it didn't work. Every pregnancy is different. Let's say you've had multiple IVF transfers and you've spotted with all of them and you didn't get a positive. And now you are spotting and you're thinking, I'm not going to get a positive. That's not necessarily true. You could get a positive. So a lot of it has to do with what is the color and how much you're spotting and where are you at in your IVF cycle. If you're having brown spotting, that's not worrisome at all. That's normal. It's totally normal. If you're having very light pink when you wipe, that's normal as well, especially if you're using endometrium or some type of vaginal progesterone. You can very often hit your cervix. So if that is happening, that's fine as well. If you're having bright red full flow, that's when you want to call your reproductive endocrinologist or the nurse at the RA's office. So now that we've cleared that up, let's talk about spotting after you've gotten a positive pregnancy test. This can happen all the time. Again, we're going to stick with those same rules. If it's brown, that's okay. If it's light pink when you wipe, that's okay too, especially if you're continuing progesterone through week 10 or 12 after your transfer. If you're having full flow, that's when you want to call the nurse. But there is an exception to this. If you have bright red spotting and it only happens once, you still want to call the nurse, but it could be something called a subchorionic hematoma, which has a much higher incidence of happening in an IVF transfer. Typically the baby's fine, mom is fine, but there's a little bit of a bruise that lets go. So again, you'll want to call your IVF doctor or the nurse and go in for some imaging. I hope this helped you clear up exactly what type of spotting you're having, and I hope that you have a very successful IVF cycle.